Welcome to the Peaceful Worldschooling podcast, featuring your host, Ajharders. We are committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. Together, we believe that the world is our biggest and best classroom, and the people and places in it are our greatest teachers. So I invite you to join me on the adventure of a lifetime, beginning with a conversation that can change the world. Today's episode of the Peaceful Worldschooling podcast is brought to you by the book Gospel-Based Parenting, a biblical study on discipline and discipling. In this book, you will explore what the Bible really says about spanking and how we can discipline our children the biblical way without spanking or punishment. Every chapter includes a list of discussion and application questions to help you reflect on God's Word, God's heart, and your own heart as you seek to discipline and disciple your children like Jesus. Buy your copy today. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Peaceful Worldschooling podcast, where we are committed to cultivating a peaceful world beginning right in our own hearts and homes. My name is Ajharders, and I'm your very, very proud host. And today I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to Ashley Beougher. Thank you so very much for joining us as we have a conversation that can change the world.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I have been so looking forward to this conversation ever since I discovered you and your amazing life on Instagram and your incredible family. So for people that may not be familiar with you, Ashley, and your lifestyle, can you share a little bit about you, your family, and your story?
Oh, you're so kind. It has been really exciting for the past 6 months. You know, it's funny that you say we have such an exciting life, because prior to us leaving for this amazing adventure around the world, we had a wonderful life, but it was wonderfully boring. Like, we had no change. My husband has had one job since he graduated from college. We've had one home. We've had one city. I mean, we have had no change. And it wasn't bad. We loved all of those things. We love our home city. We're definitely not the nomadic family that has no desire to have roots and to have family, close-knit family. So we're definitely not that. We love our home. We love our kids' school that they had gone to. We loved everything. So it was never was an escape, but it was just a fun adventure that we kind of decided to go on. So my husband's a physical therapist, and that job is not traditionally a flexible, remote, nomadic job. It's kind of you're here and you're here. But he kind of was going through a natural job transition. And so we had talked about for years kind of what it would be like to just take our kids on a trip. We have always loved to travel. But at the beginning of our marriage, we've been married for 15 years at this point. We were 19 and 20 when we got married. So we're not that old, but we've been married for a long time. And when we were just getting started, it took a long time to save up for a trip. So we kind of had these plans of, okay, for our 5-year anniversary, we wanted to do a Mediterranean cruise. And then for our 10-year anniversary, we wanted to go to Tahiti. And that was kind of just our only goals. And it took about 5 years to, save when we were just starting out and we were young. So I remember, I'll never forget, we were in Tahiti. We had a babysitter for our kids. Our parents had watched our kids. And our kids were, I think, 2 and 3, getting a little easier than like the newborn stage, maybe 3 and 4. And it was our last day. And it was like, we had kind of had this vision for 10 years of what we wanted our travels to be like. And it really just was those 2 places. And at the last day, I was like, well, what now? And really the answer was like, well, just the rest of the world. Like after those first 2 things, it was just kind of everywhere else. And then at that point we were like, and we want to do it with our kids too. So since then, probably about for the last 4 years, we've traveled quite a bit internationally with the kids, just for a week at a time, here and there on school breaks and in the summer. And so it got to be that it went from our dream of one day maybe we'll take a longer extended trip, to where my husband was just kind of naturally going through a job transition. And so at that point, it kind of went from a dream to a specific plan.
Mm.
And really the only thing that wasn't ideal was COVID and just the travel hardness with COVID. However, we kind of decided if we have a specific route and 15 different places that we have to go, this trip isn't good for a COVID year. However, if we can just be super flexible and last minute and just go wherever is open, then it would still be pretty doable, and it has been. So
Wow.
fast forward, I know we'll talk about a lot more of our trip since we left. We left in August, and since then we've done 17 countries, which is just crazy to be able to have done, and a really big blessing, especially in a COVID year. So we've done it, safely, and we've tried to be wise with that, traveling during COVID and wanting to be considerate in the countries that we've been in. But so we've done about 3 months in Europe. We did a stop in Dubai, and then we did about 3 months in Africa. So the only thing that kind of made it tricky with COVID was our parents were planning to come visit us a couple times. And after twice of canceling, having to cancel at the last minute on my end, on our end, on their end, they ended up not being able to come. So we actually decided to come home for a visit for family. At the point that they couldn't come and visit us, we decided to visit them. So we're home right now, and then hopefully going to go back out for another 3 months or so to South America. So that's kind of our plan, and then we'll see from there.
That is absolutely incredible. And I'm so excited to pick your brain and just kind of learn all about the nitty gritty details of how you guys went from a very happy American based, US based family to traveling the world with 2 children. That is blowing my mind, and especially to do that during COVID. But just so people can kind of have a time frame, right now we are recording this episode on February 16th of 2022. And so you left in August of 2021. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
we started in Paris. That was our first international destination.
Okay.
Because it was the cheapest to get to. It was just pick a place that was cheap. So that's why we started there.
Awesome. So you started in Paris and have visited 17 countries in the last 6 months with 2 kids.
Yeah.
Holy cow. That is amazing. All right. So I'm super curious about how your children handled the news. Were they excited about this? I mean, were they nervous? Did they totally hate the idea of like leaving home for so long? How did they respond to the news that they were going to be traveling the world and not experiencing their normal school plans as they probably had anticipated?
Yeah, well, that's great question. They were excited. I mean, I think there was a little bit, I don't think home and schedule as much, but we are very close, as I mentioned, with specifically all our grandparents, all our parents, all their grandparents. So I think like they have friends, they're still young enough that they like being around us. They love each other. They're best friends. So I think just being a family of 4, and the flip side is maybe we're not seeing these people, but they've never had the chance to have this this time with my husband like they have. I've always been at home with them when they've been real little, but he's always just had such a demanding job that I think it was a give and take. Like we weren't going to be able to see our family and our cousins and our grandparents, but this just incredible gift of getting to spend this time with their dad that they've never gotten to do before, and probably maybe won't ever have another chance like that. Most kids don't ever have 6 months or a year of just quality time with both their parents. So I think we all saw that as just such a gift. And they did great. They're really great travelers. After a while, just the missing the grandparents really kind of weighed on all of us, but specifically them. I think if we had just known up front that we weren't going to see them for a year, we could have kind of gotten our minds around it. Yeah. It was the roller coaster of the first time my parents actually got to where we were in Europe and had a family emergency and had to turn around and fly back like 5 hours later. So that was just such a roller coaster of, emotions. Yeah. And then the second time we actually were going to meet them in Egypt. And then this was around Christmas time, and ended up, we had no health problems, perfect health the whole time. And we tested positive like 2 days for COVID, like 2 days before they were supposed to come. And so they had to cancel.
Gosh.
So it was just the roller coaster of last minute changes. And our
Yeah.
cases were super mild, and we just quarantined for 2 weeks, and it was okay. But so at that point, that was when we said, you know what, it's just time to come home for a visit. So I think if it would have been different if we had just planned to not, to see them. But
Yeah, that makes sense. Having those last minute changes, especially when you're looking forward to seeing someone, and especially having them so close and then have them turn around and go back. I mean, that must have been heartbreaking for you and so difficult for your children too, I'm sure.
yeah, of all of the just things that you think about, like what's going to be hard about traveling, I mean, it's been all good things for our family, all just, it's not been perfect. Like we've had bad days, but it really has been easier than we thought, and better than we thought. That's really
Mhm.
been the only thing that's been like just really tough,
Yeah.
to kind of walk through. Because that, like you said, like that's hard, especially for a child. That's not little. That's like big kid emotions. That's adult emotions. But other than that, I mean, it's been easy and great, and all better things than what we had even hoped it would be.
Wow, that's amazing. And so before you traveled, I know that you said you had a 5-year goal for your marriage and then you had a 10-year goal. Had you guys traveled internationally before that, or was that kind of your first experience traveling internationally at the 5 and 10-year mark of your marriage?
So my husband traveled kind of around the U.S. Before we got married. I did travel internationally quite a bit with my mom, and so it wasn't necessarily new for either of us, but we knew that we wanted to, even if it wasn't completely familiar.
Yeah.
So I don't after I guess 2018 was when the first time we took the kids on an international trip. They were 4 and 5 at the time, and that went really well. And so we kind of just went on from there. So even before August, I think they had both been to maybe 5 or 6 countries. So not very well traveled, but enough to know like we could kind of do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so like the logistical part of me is wondering, how on earth do you even plan for this? Like when you guys made that decision, okay, we're going to leave in August, we're going to travel the world for a year with 2 kids. Walk me through I guess, your thought process as far as like logistics, finances. I know that you said that because of COVID, you couldn't really have specific, like, we're going to go here on this date, and you kind of had to be a little bit more flexible. But walk me through a little bit more regarding like how you started even planning for something this massive.
Sure. Yeah. So I think a big part of our planning was our home, because we do own our home and
Mhm.
it's paid off. And so it also is a big part of like our nest egg is our home.
Yeah.
So it's different than, oh, we get renters to come in and whatever. It's
Right.
like, this is kind of our wealth is our home,
Yeah.
is tied up into our home. So it's a little more stressful to make a good decision when, it's cash. And
Right.
so I think that was probably the biggest decision we made. We ended up deciding to keep it. My sister-in-law and her family lived in our house for a couple months, and then it just sat vacant the rest of the time. A lot of stuff went into that. We had a lot of problems with our house right before, like the week before we left. Like we found this like ant infestation, and it was
Oh
so
my.
stressful. So I don't know if we would. It wasn't a bad choice to just leave our home and just leave it vacant. I don't know if we had known, if in retrospect, if we would have made that decision. Just because we ended up having problems with it, we probably would have just sold it.
Mhm.
And that's actually kind of one of the things that we're doing during our visit home, is probably getting ready to sell our house before we go back out. So we probably would have done things differently, but we had no way of knowing that this would have all, that we would be back 6 months instead of a year, that
Mhm.
things problems would have happened right before we left. So that's what we decided to do. I could kind of counsel different people different ways depending on their situation. But the house was definitely probably our biggest decision. we tried to sell a lot of stuff regardless, just because we were doing backpacks for a year. And so we knew we'd come home, which we did, so overwhelmed by our stuff. So we tried to get rid of, everything but the bare minimum. And then we come home and we're still just so overwhelmed by our stuff. So but other than that, as far as the planning of the trip goes, we really didn't plan, and which is kind of a bummer. I love planning for a trip. That's one of my favorite things, is just finding out all the details, and that's just like a hobby for me. But we just didn't do it because there was no point. So we kind of did it as we went, and for the most part, kind of being spontaneous worked out pretty well. There was a few times that we were like, if we had looked into this more than 2 minutes in advance, we would have known to not do X, Y, and Z. But for the most part, it kind of all just worked out for the most part.
So you mentioned that you packed everything in 4 backpacks. How on earth do you pack for an entire year with just 4 backpacks? I know you mentioned kind of getting rid of a lot of things and only keeping the essentials, but I would love to hear if you have any tips for people that are thinking about this. What are some, I guess, tips that you would have for packing for an entire year with 4 backpacks?
So this is actually the number one question, more than budgeting, more than food, more than travel logistics. This is the number one question we get, is how the heck do you pack for a year for 4 people and 4 backpacks? So we have a very detailed blog post I can share with you that actually goes out and tells every single item we brought in each backpack, what's there for the kids, what's there for us. And then we've even actually gone back and updated that of, hey, we thought we need this, we really didn't, or there's a few things we've added, but really we haven't. I mean, very few times, little if any, have there been moments of we need more than we do. The one thing I can think of specifically is we packed for warm weather primarily, and then we packed like a couple, like 1 long sleeve shirt and 1 long sleeve pants for when it was cooler. But those 2 items were specifically designed to keep us warm. And so when we got to Dubai and then on into Uganda, we needed to be covered, but it was hot. And so our pants and our long sleeve shirts were specifically for wanting to get warm, and we needed to be cool, but with Muslim cultures, we needed to be covered. And so Abigail, my daughter, and I picked up like $3 little dresses that were like, covered our shoulders, covered our knees, and that's just kind of what we wore the whole time. So that was really the only moment that we needed something different than what we had. And other than that, we really we didn't need anything more. And a lot of times when we would unpack for a week or 2, we would be like, we have to get rid of stuff. We have too much stuff, so it really just, once you get used to it, you kind of get into I don't know, I heard someone say the other day that minimalism can almost be as addictive as like shopping, like the addiction of buying more stuff, you can almost get that way for the opposite extreme of minimalism. And that's kind of how I think we feel it, to where it almost, when we got home, I almost struggled for it to like affect my mood. I would just be like, we have too much stuff. We have too much stuff, So yeah, I think it's just once you see you need so little, it's almost addictive,
That is so true. And it is like almost this addiction, because I feel like you almost get this high when you like let go of things and you realize like you're lighter and your space is cleaner, and literally, I mean, it's like everything about you, your home, your space, your soul, I feel like just feels lighter as you're releasing this stuff. And it is a huge revelation to be able to see everything you have and everything that we have in this materialistic society here in the United States, and the abundance that we have, and to be able to look at all of this and say, okay, I really don't need all of this, and to have that freedom to let it go. I mean, what a powerful thing. And it's so funny because I'm hearing you talk about this and I'm thinking about my own, experience with traveling. And, I grew up kind of traveling the world with my family. We would always go on international trips every year. And even now, like if I were to go, to the beach 3 hours away or something, I know I'd have this ginormous suitcase, and I always leave the house with this fear of like, oh my gosh, what if I'm forgetting something, And having that anxiety, like, I'm going to miss something, or I'm going to forget something. But my mom would always remind me, if you realize that you forget something, you can always buy it there. And
Yes.
that was such great advice, for me, and just being able to kind of relax and breathe a little bit. Like, whenever, anywhere that I go, they're going to have things that people need to live. So if I find that I really, really, really do need something, I can always go buy it.
Yeah.
And not feel like I have to carry, my whole home with me on a trip somewhere in this ginormous suitcase, but to be able to let it go. What about
Well,
for
and
your?
what's funny about that is we never had a dryer. We sometimes didn't have a washing machine. We never had a dishwasher. And since we've been back, I've been laughing at myself that I find it's more like I have gotten more behind with laundry and dishes with these modern conveniences than I did when we traveled. And I think when you have so little, at dinner at night, we would just immediately wash our 4 plates. We'd put them in the drying rack and we'd get them out the next day. Like there was no dishes to do. It was just you use the same stuff. Same with laundry. Like we'd hang everything up, we'd get them out the next morning and wear them and then do the process all over again. And I think when you don't have many options, like whether it's with dishes, when we were in Kenya, if we left our dishes for more than 2 seconds, like the bugs would just come. So there was no waiting, like you had to do everything right away.
Wow.
And same thing with laundry, when you don't have many options, you have to stay on top of it or else you don't have anything to wear. So there was never this ability to just kind of let things go. And since we've been back, I've been laughing at myself that I'm constantly behind on laundry and dishes somehow, because we need the machines to help us with the amount of stuff we have, I think.
Right. Well, and we also kind of need them to be full, right? Like you don't want to run a dishwasher
Yes.
with 3 dishes in it. So it's like, okay, well, I've got to wait till I have this pile of dishes in my sink or on my counter, and then we'll load this dishwasher with all the stuff. And but you're right, when you're using less stuff, it just makes sense. You deal with it right away, and then it's done, and you don't have to deal with the pile of laundry. You've only got a couple things to clean, that is so true. It is ironic the way that it kind of works out that way.
Yeah.
That's funny. I know it's easy to think about that, I think, when it comes to like clothes and maybe like body care products or things like that. But I'm curious about how it was to be a minimalist when it comes to things that your children love, like toys. I can't imagine what that would have been like for them to leave behind all their toys and stuff.
Yes, so I think it made a big difference that we hadn't gotten rid of it all. We did get rid of a lot, and we tried to, while we still know that they're children and want their stuffed animals, and that's okay. Like there's a balance there of not being unreasonable for how they would feel about things. But also we always try to talk about like the trade-off, like we intentionally don't do things so we can say yes to others. We say no to things. It's not because we can't, like we could do XYZ, but we're choosing to say no because we want to do other things. We have other priorities. So we always try to show them that it's a trade-off. You have to say no to some things in order to say yes to others. And so to an extent, we tried to kind of guide them in that. And we didn't make them get rid of, their most special, things that they've had since they were little, but we tried within reason to kind of encourage them, like, well, hey, like whatever money you sell your things for, use that for a trip, like to get an ice cream cone or whatever. So we tried to push them in getting rid of a lot of their stuff while still being reasonable that, they could keep some stuff. So I think it made a big difference that it was at home for them, that when they got back, which is part of the reason I feel so overwhelmed, because we got it all out as soon as we got home. But I think as far as what we brought with us, so both of them have little loveys that are just their little stuffed animals that they've had since they were born. So they both brought those, and the big thing with that is, what if you lose it? So it's a give or take. My son isn't super attached to his, but he still wanted to bring his. So he just said, if I lose it, I lose it. And he didn't. So my daughter is very attached to hers still, even at 8 years old. So what we actually did was the Christmas before, when we knew we were traveling, we bought her the exact same one, but not hers. And so she brought that one along, and it still looked the same. It was clearly different because one looked new and one did not, but it was a good compromise because she still had it, but if she lost that one, we could buy another one on Amazon. The one that
Yeah.
she's had since she was a baby was, left at home. So that
Well,
was
that's
a good
really
compromise that we both felt good about. So they brought their loveys. My son brought 2 baseball gloves and a ball. So we did lug that around for 17 countries because that's just what my husband and him love to do together. We brought a fairly big bag of Legos that made the cut in our 4 bag. And we every day they played with those, never got tired of them. We used those every single day. A great decision to haul those along with us.
wow.
We just put them in a bag. And then coloring was the other thing that we kind of chose to prioritize with our schooling. I put a lot of emphasis on just read aloud, and they listen even better when they have something to do with their hands. So
Yeah.
they can listen for hours if they're playing with Legos or coloring. And so that's just a big part of our schooling day. So I thought that was definitely worth it to prioritize packing. But that was about it, I think, as far as what we brought for them.
Uh-huh. You mentioned schooling. What does schooling look like when you're traveling the world?
So the main thing, I think I would have thought about it differently if this was going to be our long-term decision. I think I would have felt a little bit more pressure to be keeping up with things, just me personally. But for 1 year, they're missing second and third grade. I don't feel a lot of pressure to be making sure we're keeping up with every subject that they would have been doing in school. Because for this trip, it'll probably be just a year. We'll put their school at home is a 3-day-a-week program, and then they're homeschooled 2 days. So we weren't completely familiar or unfamiliar with what homeschooling looks like, being home. And so that's probably where we'll impact with them. So I think I didn't put as much pressure on myself because it was 1 year. It was second and third grade. It's not this lifelong decisions we're making. Who knows? Maybe it is, and then I'll think of it differently. But for this year, we kind of thought I talked to their teachers that they were going to be missing, and I basically said, I don't want to offend you, but I don't want to set them up for failure for going forward. But I really don't want to do any more than what we absolutely have to do. And I don't feel bad about that, because when you're in Rome and the Colosseum is out your window, I don't want to be spending 6 hours doing book work, like we want to go and tour the city. So I felt really good about that. And I think math was the one thing that they said, it's hard to catch up when you get behind if you're going to be going back into a traditional school setting. So we brought their math books, and they were their workbooks. They're Abeka homeschool books. And both of them, but the second grade one I really love, because every page, the theme is a different country. So it worked out perfectly for our homeschool, and it's colorful and fun, and it was a workbook. So once they were done, they were pretty heavy at the beginning. They were soft, but pretty thick. But we were able to tear off the pages as we went. So it got lighter, and that was also motivation to work through it, because it got lighter. They had to carry their own books. So it got lighter as we went. So we did keep up with that, and that went really well. They just do math every morning. The other big component that we did choose to bring is that we invested in some really good quality journals. So they're only souvenir, and I have pictures of these, I think, on our Facebook page. They're so sweet. They just look like they're just our trip in a nutshell. I mean, it's such a good representation of kind of what we've done and our experiences. So the only souvenir that we've done is every destination we go to, they get to pick out a sticker, and their stickers go on the covers of their journals. So their journal covers are just covered with all the places we've been to, and they're really, really sweet. And then most every day we do a journal entry, and we kind of talk about it serves a lot of purposes. One, it helps us remember what we've learned, whether it was a tour or even just stuff of, hey, we spent 30 hours on a plane. Talk about the logistics of what it felt like, going through that. So it doesn't always have to be just facts that we learned. Sometimes if we weren't really doing a lot of touring, I would let them pick out a book on an ebook about that country, or if we saw a volcano, maybe learn about volcanoes, like read the book and write a paragraph about it. And
Uh-huh.
then after that, we can kind of talk about that. Kind of incorporates a lot of things. It incorporates handwriting. We can
Mhm.
talk about parts of speech and grammar just as we're doing. So we kind of use that as a catch-all language arts, literature, grammar. That's kind of all encompassing in their journals and their souvenirs.
Yeah,
So
journals are such a beautiful way to like naturally practice writing, I feel like.
yeah.
It's one of my favorite things to this day to look back on my journals that I wrote when I was, in elementary school and we would be in Germany with my family or something like that. And being able to see that and have that like written record and just see that growth that happens is so beautiful. And it's funny because when you write things down, you do like you remember things better than if I had never written them. Like, oh, I would have forgotten that we did that, or I would have forgotten that we went here, or I would have forgotten what that felt like in that moment. So I love that your kids are able to keep a journal and kind of keep that memento of their travels. And you're talking to an unschooler here. So we actually don't use any curriculum or any kind of formal learning, even though I'm a teacher by trade, but we do unschooling at home. And I so resonate with what you're saying about why would you kind of waste time doing book work at home when you have the Coliseum in your backyard. And it's so true. Children really do learn best when they are having these real life, real world experiences. I guarantee you they are going to learn and remember the Coliseum so much better because they've been there than from any textbook or worksheet or workbook that they could have ever had about the Coliseum. So those real life experiences for your children, that is going to be such an important foundational part of their learning. So please do not feel guilty, in any way, like they're missing, second and third grade. No, like the gift that you are providing to your children to be able to experience places and cultures and food and adventure and travel and riding on public transportation and meeting new friends and hearing other languages, all of that is such valuable learning. And even the most important part, which is what you said, being able to spend time with you and your husband. So I hope that you can feel very happy with your choice and know that your children will not be behind and they're not going to be missing out on anything. In fact, they're able to experience things that many children could only dream of. And so that's a beautiful opportunity. I hope that one day my children will be able to do the same. But for now, we're here. we're here in the US living vicariously through families like you.
No, I agree. And that's so beautifully said. And I do think we saw that the whole way through. There really wasn't, like I said, I don't know if I would be brave enough to do it long term, but there was not one moment during our trip that I felt like, oh, we really need to be doing more. It was like, this is plenty. This is plenty. And I love, one of my favorite things, as I mentioned earlier, is reading as a family. And so we read, I think I saw a study right before we left that said something about like, if you read as a family for 4 hours a day, you could do like nothing else, like for all of your children's school, and they would be fine. Like they learn everything they need in just like reading as a family and reading, by themselves. So that kind of gave me the gumption to say, no, we're good for the year. And so it was such a gift just being able to pick books. So, for example, for our first stop in France, the first day we went to Normandy, and it was so incredibly educational for our kids to see, how France was affected in World War II. And so that whole week we spent hours, and really the majority of our school time, just reading a book about, which was a wonderful book. It was called Black Radishes, about a boy that lived in France who was Jewish and what it was like during World War II for him. So it was engaging for the kids. I enjoyed it. And that's really my favorite thing to do as far as school time or whatever with the kids, is picking a book that we are all interested in, that goes along with where we are in the world.
So where do you get these books from again? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, well, a couple different thoughts. One, and I can't remember her name, but there's a book called Give Your Children the World. I think that's what it's called. I'll double check with you afterwards and you can link it. I think it's called Give Your Children the World, or Give Your Child the World. And it's all about, hey, we would all love to travel the world, but even if you can't, you and your children can experience the world together through books. And so the first half is kind of the philosophy behind it. And then the second half of the book is just a book list of recommendations of by continent and by country and by age group, and like a description of, if you're in Egypt, and so you can go to the Middle East, and then you can go to Egypt, and then you can go to your kids' age groups and read a couple descriptions and pick one that would be good for them. So what I've used that as a reference a ton of times. It used to be free on Amazon Prime, so it may still be. I think it still is. So that's a great one just to have. I think I got it from the library and decided that I needed it as a reference, long term. So I bought it. But then other than that, just Googling, and for my kids are a little older, so we don't do picture books quite as much. So I would maybe Google chapter books set in Egypt or chapter books set in Uganda. And after a while, after maybe a 20-minute search, you can kind of get a list together of what's going to be good. So I try to find them. Our local library in America is great because we can get them via Kindle, via online. So when I can, that's free. So I look at those books first. And then if I really, really like it and I can't find it elsewhere, I'll buy it on Amazon. And, normally they're not very expensive, but our library also does Hoopla. And so between our library, like Libby app and Hoopla, probably 75% of the books that I want to find, I can find for them on there.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't think to use the local library to get the Kindle versions of books. So that's a really great suggestion. And I was really surprised. Last summer, I was actually teaching a reading class to middle schoolers. And of course, they were virtual because of COVID. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, how do we do reading, with these kids that I've never seen, and a lot of them didn't have access to books at home, or they, couldn't get books for whatever reason. And I was shocked. I would literally just Google, PDF version of Harry Potter, or, any book you could literally imagine. If you just Google the book and then PDF, you would be surprised how many PDF versions of books are available. And then another really good resource that was helpful for us that I really liked and enjoyed is actually YouTube. There are a lot of people that read books on YouTube. So if ever, you want to listen to your child, or maybe you don't like reading aloud, or, for whatever reason, or maybe you don't have time to read aloud, you can definitely go on YouTube and look up any book possibly that you could think of. And someone has probably read that book out loud on YouTube as a free kind of audiobook version of that. So yeah, Googling PDF books that you can find or that you're interested in, that is a great option. Then also checking out YouTube too. But it's amazing how through technology we have access to so much, that we're able to have literally at our fingertips. And I'm sure that was probably really helpful to not have to lug around all of these books with you while you're traveling, and still to be able to do read alouds as a family. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's been one of my daughter's favorite things about being back, though, is she really loves a real book. So being able to go to the library and pick out a real book and go through the pages, she's really enjoyed that. But like you said, it just wasn't an option while we traveled. So we did Kindles and just dealt with it.
All right. So you share with me about the backpacks. We talked a little bit about school. I know that you said you started in France. Where did you go from there? I would love to just kind of get an overview, kind of map journey. Started in France, and then what did the journey look like from there?
Yeah. So, and one thing I'll say about Europe is people always talk about how expensive it is, and it can be, but transportation is so cheap, whether you fly or, honestly, our favorite mode of transportation ended up being buses. Almost even in Africa, you kind of have to know what you're getting into, but even in Africa, the buses were very clean and fine. That's not always the case. So kind of maybe do a Google search of what it's like. But every bus we had, and it was, especially with COVID, it's so easy. And some of them require different things. So make sure you have everything. But most of the time, our paperwork wasn't even checked. You get there 15 minutes before, you put your bags on, and then you're off to go. And it was cheap. And most of the time it was very comfortable. We did a couple overnight buses and the kids did fine with that. But especially during COVID, the airports were just such a process, and so you don't have to worry about liquids and all of that. It's just a lot easier. So we really tried to, unless it was a lot cheaper, we really tried not to fly if we didn't have to. So we did, we started in Paris, we did a day in Normandy, we did a week in Paris, and then it was 2 days before we left, we decided where we were going because everything was so last minute. So we did end up flying to Lisbon. That was one of our flights. So we did a week on the beach in Portugal. And then that was when we did our overnight bus to Spain. So we stayed 12 days, almost 2 weeks in Malaga. And then we went to the French Riviera, which I would say, everyone says it's beautiful. I would say that was probably our least favorite spot. It is a lot more pricey than even Spain and Portugal. And so for what we just kind of ended up not doing a whole lot. And our place was one of the not nice. We tried to do basic accommodations, but for what you could get in the French Riviera was a lot less than even in Spain or even in Italy. So that was probably our least favorite spot, just because I think we were trying to do it very budget friendly, and you can do it, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out quite as well. So we did Monaco for a day. That was fun. So that we consider that a country because it's a principality / country. So we count that. And then we did Cinque Terre for a week in Italy. Loved that. We did Rome and we did a night in Venice. And then we went up to Slovenia and spent almost a month there. And I would say that's probably overall our favorite country that we went to.
Really? Why is that?
So it's very small. So you can go from the Alps. I mean, there's areas of Slovenia that look just as beautiful as Switzerland. Like it's legit Alps that they have there. So you can go from the Alps in 2 hours, you can be in the Adriatic Sea. You can go to the west or the east, sorry, and do like thermal baths there, but it's all very compact. So you can get from one corner of the country to the other in like 2 or 3 hours. So it's just very easy to move around. It doesn't take hardly any time to get anywhere you want to go. The people there are just really sweet. They speak really good English there because their country's just not very big. And so outside of just their little area, no one speaks Slovene. So everyone speaks very good English there for the most part. And so the people there are just very friendly. I think it's kind of a hidden gem, but I don't know that there's this big push to have that be the next big tourist destination. They kind of seem content that it's this hidden gem, but people are very proud of their country. And so even there was 2 women that we met in Kenya that were from Slovenia, and they just couldn't believe that we had been there, and we knew exactly where like that coffee shop was that we were talking about. And so it's just the people there are very sweet. It has beautiful mountains. You can go to the beach, and it's just all very compact. And then it's beautiful, like all of Europe is, as far as like the European towns, but it's much cheaper than the Western part. So it's definitely more Eastern, cheaper Europe, but it still has the charm. It still has the mountains. It kind of has everything for a cheaper price and just super sweet people. So that's why that's our favorite.
So I assume you weren't planning on staying there for a month. Is that correct? Or was that kind of the plan?
Yeah, so Slovenia actually was probably my husband's #1 destination that he wanted to go to. So I think we probably planned on maybe 3 weeks there. We ended up finding a amazing little Airbnb for 25 euros a night on the kind of right off the beach. And so that's kind of an example of, we didn't even know where this town was. We hadn't looked at it at all, but we kind of moved quickly. We were ready to pause and kind of settle down for like a couple weeks and not do a whole lot. So we saw this Airbnb and we're like, that sounds good. And then we looked afterwards to see where like it was. And, but it, it turned out being in this beautiful old European coastal town. And then we knew we wanted to spend some time in the mountains. So I don't know, we probably spent a little more time there than we thought, but we did know we wanted to prioritize that. And it's real close to other countries. So we went down to Croatia for a night and did Plitvice lakes, which are, you can see online. They're beautiful. There's waterfalls just everywhere. As far as just natural beauty, it's probably one of the prettiest places we've ever been. Mm-hmm. So we went down to Croatia for one night just to do that. And even that's doable. You can go down. It was 2-3 hour drive away, go do something, and then, come back. So it's just very easy to get around. And then we did one night in Austria, very unexpectedly, because we were planning on staying in Slovenia and we had all these hikes planned, and we looked at the weather and it was 100% rain for the next 4 days. So we were like, well, we've kind of done everything besides the hiking, and we weren't going to do that in like the torrential downpours. So I'm looking at a map and I told my husband, I said, Salzburg is like 2 hours away. We should go there. And so literally that was probably the most spontaneous. I saw that night. We packed up the next morning and we did the Sound of Music tour in Salzburg.
Love
and
that.
Yeah. So that was probably the most last minute. Literally, you look at a map and it's like, well, that doesn't look far away. Let's go do that. So we escaped. We went far enough to escape the rain, but it was like a 2 hour drive. So it was no problem.
That's awesome. Perfect for a day trip. So after Slovenia, then where did you guys head?
So we took a bus to Budapest because we knew we wanted to go to Dubai kind of in the next couple weeks. And Budapest has a budget airline called Wizz Air that it was like $50 a flight to go from Budapest to Dubai. So we took a bus to Budapest. We did a weekend there. They have really good thermal baths. So that's pretty much all we did there. Because I think we went to like 3 or 4. So that's what we did there. We went to Dubai, which was awesome. Also very pricey, but if you plan on it, it was so fun. So my son's favorite part of the whole trip, and what he wanted to do for the trip. When you talk about being nervous or scared about, you give them something to look forward to. And this is what he was looking forward to from before we left, was Dubai has the biggest water park in the world, called Atlantis Aquaventure. And so we did that for 2 days. And we had very high expectations, and it still was like his favorite part of the whole trip. Oh. So we did that for about 12 days. We did like an overnight desert safari. That was really fun, and did some fun stuff while we were there. And then we flew to Uganda from Dubai, and we spent 3 weeks working with or visiting some missionary friends that live there. They have a campus that they have a school that they sponsor children for. They have they do a lot of medical care. So they do a lot with disabilities. And so my husband was able to be really helpful while he was there, kind of putting his PT stuff, fitting people for wheelchairs and making beds and all that stuff. So that was really good. That was my daughter's favorite destination because we were on a campus with other English speaking kids, and that she was ready for that. She was ready for some friends. And the campus was just kind of, the kids had free reign. So it was, I think, so before that, the kids had just been right next to us all the time. And most of the kids, they got really good at kind of miming things and playing with kids, even if they didn't speak the same language. But it was time, and she was really excited about just being able to run off and go play with kids that speak English. So that was just a good gift for her. So we did that, and that was just
too to go from Dubai, which is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, to go from that to Uganda. I mean, that must have been quite the dramatic shift, just as far as economics and what that experience was like for them to go from super wealthy to now working in a place that really experiences a lot of poverty.
Yeah, I never really, I thought about those two things individually. I've never really thought about the fact that we did them back to back, but you're right. It was just a good thing for all of us to learn, for our kids to learn to serve, to our kids to learn that sometimes, I think all of Africa, like sometimes we're hot and sometimes we want to go home, but like when you see other things, around you, it kind of puts things into perspective. So I think it was really good for all of us to have the chance to, even though none of us did it perfectly, but to put others' needs before our own, even when it was hot and even when it was, dirty or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that was a really good 3 weeks for us. So after that, we went to Kenya, because the thing about Africa is I always thought about it being cheap, and it is sometimes, but how to getting from place to place is very expensive. So
Mm.
from Uganda, the absolute cheapest place we could get to anywhere was Kenya, which is just next door. But it was still like $200 per person one way,
Oh,
which
wow.
to me is pricey, right? Especially when we got from Hungary to Dubai for $50 per person one way. So that's the tricky part about Africa, is it's really not as cheap to travel around. So we kind of figured out pretty early we just needed to stay. It wasn't going to be like Europe that we could go one night here and one night here. We
Yeah.
needed to pick a spot, and it was going to cost us to get there. But once it did, it wasn't too expensive, but we just needed to stay a little bit longer in one spot.
Hmm.
So we went to Kenya. We went to Diani Beach, which is on the coast and it's not really what I thought of Kenya. It has beautiful snorkeling. The Indian Ocean is just beautiful there. So we did that for almost 3 weeks, or almost a month, really. We spent Christmas there. So it was funny because, it's almost on the equator. So it was like 100 degrees on Christmas Day. And we saw Santa coming in on a camel to one of the resorts. So it was just a fun adventure. It kind of helped it be just very different from what we are. A lot of people still celebrate Christmas there because it's a lot of internationals, and they all go to the beach so it was very festive, like there was decorations and but so different. It was almost hard to miss Christmas at home because it just was so different. So that was good. And then that's when we went to Nairobi. We were planning to go to Egypt from there. But then we tested positive for COVID. So everything kind of got delayed about 2 weeks. I didn't mention we did a safari in Uganda and loved it so much that we did a second safari in Kenya. So after we got out of quarantine, we did a safari in Kenya, and then we did 2 weeks in Egypt, and now we're home. So that was the long answer to your question. We did so much. It's hard to make it
Much.
quick.
That's amazing. And I know you mentioned, the travel expenses were so different. And then of course, having to pay for housing for that whole time. How much did you budget for this trip? And were you over or under budget?
So we kind of broke it down to categories and per month. So, and I remember this a little bit more because I just sent it someone, and I'm happy to share kind of how it broke down if you want to, add that. Because I don't know if I can remember everything, but activities and entertainment, we budgeted for 1,000 for a month. And that was kind of just every activity we would want to do, whether that was canyoning or whitewater rafting or a tour in a city or whatever that would look like, a cooking class in Rome. All of that was under that budget. I think we budgeted maybe 1,400 a month for transportation. We budgeted about that same amount for accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a couple other categories. We had some home expenses that we kind of budgeted for as well.
Mm-hmm.
Accommodations, I would say we tried to be about 50 a night or less. So if we were in someplace for just one night, we would get the cheapest accommodation we could find with verified reviews that we weren't going to come away with bed bugs or anything. But we did some hostels with the kids and that was all fine. So if it was just 1 or 2 nights, we would just say within reason, the cheapest thing we could find. If it was for a week or 2, we did mainly Airbnbs, and we would still be able to stay around 500 for the week, sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. But 500 was usually attainable even in Europe. and we would try to get at least a 1-bedroom so that we would have just a little bit of space. Sometimes we could get a nice 2-bedroom. One of the nicest places we stayed the entire trip was in Malaga, Spain, and it was a beautiful 2-bedroom, with a pool that you could walk to the beach. So that amount definitely gets you different things depending on where you are, for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you did some hostels, some Airbnbs. Actually, I had interviewed another Worldschooling family, and they had shared about trusted house sitters. I don't know if you're familiar with that website.
Yes, I am. And I think it would be great. I know, I want to say when I looked at it, it was maybe like 150. Maybe that's wrong. I shouldn't say that because I'm not sure. You had to pay an initial upfront, which would be more than worth it if you knew you were gonna, kind of commit to it.
Yeah.
But I think for us, that initial upfront cost was a little more than what I was thinking when I didn't know if we would use it or not. Because you have to be kind of flexible for where, but there's tons of families that use it with great, great success.
Yeah. So for people who maybe missed that episode, Trusted House Sitters is a website where, as Ashley mentioned, you pay kind of like a membership fee for the year. And I think you're right. It is somewhere between like $150 to $200 for the whole year. And then you're able to stay in other people's houses basically for free. Most of the houses have like dogs or cats or something, like they're looking for someone to stay in their house while they're traveling and help take care of their pets. Although there are some families that just have their house there that want someone to just house sit for them while they're maybe out of town. So if you can plan it right, that would definitely be a great option to be able to stay abroad for free. I was blown away when I saw on the website, I mean, all these houses all over France and Italy and Bali and Thailand. I mean, literally anywhere you could possibly imagine in the entire world, they have people that have their houses that are there that are available for totally free. So as Ashley mentioned, if you are planning on traveling a lot and you're planning to use it, that would definitely be another really, really great option. So doing that, and so it sounds like you kind of budgeted around like 5,000 a month to be able to do that. Was that something that you guys had kind of saved up before you left, or were you looking for ways to kind of have income coming in from another source while you were gone?
Yeah, so we did save up. We had saved up for several years. And so we had that amount for about 10 months that was set aside. We had more than that, but set aside for what we felt like was wise to spend. And I think that was really important because when we went from my husband making a good income and us having money, but not having any time. And then we swapped it to, we have lots of time, but we have no money coming in at least. Yeah. And I think that if we had not really set that money aside and planned to spend it, it would have been kind of a downer just to constantly see our bank account just kind of go down, and it's not going up because we weren't working. It's just going steadily down. Yeah. But we had a plan for that. And I think that's why budgeting is so important. That's a whole nother podcast. We feel very strongly. Yes. Budgeting and just good money finances is just really important. And I think for a marriage, that's probably been one of the biggest blessings that we've always been on the same page with that. And real early on, we kind of saw that really finances were blessing marriages and we're just destroying them. And so we kind of thought from the beginning, way early on before any of this, if we can just do one thing well, that's a good place to start. It's just doing our finances well together. And it doesn't always mean making a lot of money, but being on the same page and communicating about that has just always been really important. So yeah, I think that was a really big blessing that not only did we have that money in the bank, but we had set that aside for this purpose. Right. So we did have planned that we didn't have to work. So anything that we made, sometimes I'm able to do stuff with our blog that we get a free, excursion or a free stay or something. So any of that was just kind of a bonus, or any side money that we made, my husband or I, was just kind of a bonus. But we had it budgeted to where we didn't have to do that for about 10 months.
That's amazing. And so you're here in the US now, and how long are you planning to stay? I know you mentioned you're flying off to South America, I believe you said. So yeah, what is next in the travels of the Beougher family?
Yeah, so our plan, even when we when we landed was that we were going to be here for 6 weeks and then head back out. My husband got kind of a short-term job opportunity, and then I think we're gonna go ahead and sell our house. So both of those things were gonna be about like a 2 or 3 month window. So we kind of just decided, okay, we'll be here for that. So our plan is to leave again May and then be gone for the summer. So hopefully we'll get another good like 3 months out of it. I hope. I'm not ready to be done traveling.
Well, you don't have to be. I mean, you guys have definitely figured out a way to make all of your dreams come true, and really have put in the time and the effort to plan and budget and make arrangements, and also the flexibility. I am blown away with the way that you in particular as a mom, but your whole entire family, just in being flexible to kind of roll with the punches and go with the flow and find things last minute. I mean, it really takes a unique, special person to be able to do that, because it's not easy. It's not easy to deal with traveling, especially being in another country where maybe you don't know the language, or you don't know the people, you may not know the customs or the rules of engagement, and then to just be able to kind of go with it is I think that would be very challenging for me. But I'm so impressed at the way that you guys have been able to do that through 17 different countries. It's incredible.
It's been really good for our kids, I think, and it makes us kind of want to be on our A game. That's not the right phrase, but when we see like the way that we react to things when things don't go as expected, or there was one night that we've decided that with accommodations for us, we're always going to book with at least one verified review, because I know this doesn't happen and people have good experiences. We have had twice that our listing was just completely fraudulent. It was once on booking.com and once on VRBO. Like we got there and it just didn't exist. Like it was just completely fraudulent. And neither of them had reviews. And I know there's another family that we've connected with, and we're like, oh, our favorite is when they don't have reviews, because they're excited for us to be there and they're new. And so lots of other people have great experiences with booking ones without reviews. We've just not going to do that anymore because of our own experiences. But so I remember one night we had kind of just had a rough day. We're in Rome, our first night. It's like 9:00 at night and we have nowhere to stay. Like we'd have no idea where we're going to stay. And so we know like our kids are watching, and our kids are, kind of affected by how they can tell when we're stressed. And they feed off of that. So it makes us just very careful the way that we respond to things, because they are watching. And just, I think that's a huge gift of what do you do when that happens, and teaching our kids. And our motto in our family is that to be flexible. And my son, when he was really small, just got his words mixed up and said, yeah, we want to be sensible. So that's become our just motto, is that our goal is to be flexible. And when we're all crying and we're all a hot mess, let's just not be crazy people. Like, let's just be sensible. So flexible is our goal and sensible is our backup.
I love that. Be flexible and be sensible. I feel like if the world could master, if every human being could master those two things, we would be so much happier, I think, and fulfilled in our lives, being flexible and being sensible. I love that. Yeah. So one of the things that I love talking with people about is learning, and really getting the fact that all of life is learning, and that there's valuable learning that we do all the time, no matter where we are, no matter what is going on around us. And I would love to ask you, what are some of your favorite lessons that you have learned, or your favorite things that you have learned from your traveling as a family?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think what we just talked about is probably number one, just the ability as a family to, now granted, like we learn interesting history in Venice or whatever, and all of those things are amazing things that our kids have learned, but just the ability to handle things as a family and to stick together when we have no place to stay and it's 9 p.m. or whatever that looks like. I think that that's probably been as much of a gift as anything. And that, like I said, the quality time specifically that they've gotten to spend with my husband, I just see as just such a blessing and such a gift. And I think even just the adventure side, like new experiences, new, we haven't seen anything like this. How do you react? And even especially going to predominantly Muslim countries like in Dubai and Egypt, how do you treat people with respect, and how do you love them, and um, how do you interact and know what you believe, but then also to remember that we're in their country, they're not, they're not in ours. And so we want to be overly respectful, we want to be overly generous and loving towards them, and to set the example in that. And so I think just having good conversations with about what we believe, and then, but what's something that's great about one of the things that we did in Dubai was we visited a really famous mosque, and actually it was in Abu Dhabi, and we sat in their little lobby because it has Papa John's, and we're from Kentucky and Papa John's is founded here, so we were so excited to finally get Papa John's pizza. And so we're sitting there having Papa John's. And so we just talked about, okay, what's the 6 pillars of Islam? And then what's something in this that we've just learned that's admiring about their culture? What's admiring in their dedication to prayer? Like that's inspiring, to us. That should be inspiring, even if we believe differently. And so just wanting to kind of shape their worldview and knowing what we believe, but also just loving people well, I think was a good lesson. And then just all of the history. When we were in Rome, we saw, we did so many good tours, and then we went to Salzburg, and it was funny because we were doing an audio guide. Rick Steves, by the way, has awesome walking tours, and they're really good for kids even. And so we're listening to our Rick Steves audio guide. I think we did like 30 by the time we went through all of Europe. Every place we saw Rick Steves had a walking tour. And so we were doing a walking tour, and my daughter looked over and was like, wow, this really reminds me of like what Rome, like that fountain in Rome looked like. And, cue Rick Steves in our ear is like, and I don't know if you realized, but this had so much influence from Roman architecture, So the fact that it's not just facts, but it's seeing like correlations, like that's another level when you are able to correlate things and able to see things that aren't just we memorized facts.
Yeah,
So I think all of those were just really, really great lessons to see.
that's incredible. I love that you mentioned that yes, the facts and the history, and I guess the content was a really valuable part of your learning, but even more important than the facts and the content was kind of those life skills of being able to appreciate people, learning how to love, learning how to serve, learning how to be flexible and be sensible, as you mentioned. Like those are, at the end of the day, those are the life lessons that I think are most important, for us to learn, and for our children to learn, and for us to really model for them, which it sounds like you guys have done an incredible job at modeling all of those different aspects for your children, which is incredible. And I have another question as well. If people are hearing this, I know that our time is running out, but I want to make sure that I give people an opportunity to be able to connect with you and stay connected with your journey, because truly your journey is just beginning. And I'm really excited to see what is in store for you and for your children in the future as you guys continue to travel the world and learn from everything and everyone that you experience along the way. How can people get or stay connected to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we're probably most active on Instagram. I share while we're traveling pretty frequently on that. And so everything is at Traveling Graces. So 1L, Traveling Graces. Travelinggraces.com is our website, and all the social media links are on there. We have it separated on our blog by destination. So if you're looking for a specific thing, you can go to just post on Europe or just post on Africa. But then we also have a blog section that deals more with just more of the questions we get asked, packing, finances, all of that. But Facebook, Instagram is probably the two. We have some videos on YouTube, but that takes a long time. So I haven't been as active on that since we started traveling. I was better about that when we did 1 week, and then I had 4 or 5 months to sit down and do a really good video.
Yeah.
So I haven't done as much on that. But Facebook and Instagram, we share a lot on. And if anyone has any questions or just wants to get feedback or share with me their travels, I would love to connect with them. So send me a private message as well.
Awesome. And I will be sure to include all of Ashley's links in the description of this video, or if you're watching the podcast, in the description of the podcast. So please make sure that you check out her website, her blog, her Instagram, Facebook, all that other stuff, her YouTube. And you can continue to follow Ashley and the Beougher family as they are traveling the world together. And we'll be able to see whatever is next in your journey. And one last question before we sign off for today. If you could give one piece of advice to the people that are listening, whether that be about world schooling or traveling or just life in general, parenting, whatever, budgeting, any one piece of advice that you would like to leave people with, what would that be?
Great question. I think just do something new, have a new experience with your family. And so it's okay if that doesn't mean that you're going off to the other end of the world. But starting from the very beginning of what we talked about in the podcast, we've just seen such a blessing of sharing new experiences and adventures together over material things. And we have stuff, we have a home, like this is my home, but I think that's just been the biggest blessing, strengthening our family through those two things. New experiences, adventure together has been just one of the biggest blessings in our family. So do something new with your family, even if it's in your own city.
I love that. Actually, that's one of the things that I wrote about on my blog as well, that, when COVID hit, we kind of had to put our travels on pause a little bit. But it really forced me to kind of explore what it looks like to be a peaceful world schooler right here where we live. And so just as you mentioned, you can do something new, even if it's not traveling to the other side of the world, but getting yourself out of your comfort zone with your children and really focusing on having that connected, joyful, peaceful, happy, fun, exciting, adventurous relationship with your children while they're young. I mean, this time goes by so fast. And at the end of the day, no one goes back and is like, oh man, I wish we had more stuff, or I wish that we, had more money or a bigger house or whatever. Everyone looks back at the end of their life and wishes that they had more time with the people that they love. And so I think if we can keep that present and know we have today with our children, and to do something fun and exciting and new with them, and also challenging ourselves too, that is a beautiful, beautiful piece of advice, Ashley. So thank you so much for sharing that. I will definitely try to do that today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to chat with you.
My pleasure. And to those of you that are listening, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Peaceful World Schooling podcast. I hope that this episode was as much of a blessing for you and your family as it has been for me. Remember, there are new episodes that are released every single Tuesday, so make sure that you subscribe so you will not miss out on a single one. And be sure you check out the links in the description so that you can support Ashley and her family as they are traveling the world together. All right, have a wonderful day. Join us next Tuesday on the Peaceful World Schooling podcast. I'm your host, Ajharders, and if you enjoyed today's episode, click subscribe and be sure to hit the bell so you will not miss out on a single episode.